Hello, LifeSite friends. Jim Hale with you here. It has been an unbelievable 24-hour news cycle. Last night, we got word from Thomas More Society that they had filed a lawsuit in the Northern District of New York seeking a temporary restraining order and against the vaccine mandate, in particular, the religious exemption, because in New York, you couldn't even use a religious exemption for the vaccine mandate. And just about an hour ago, we got word that a temporary restraining order has been issued. So this is good news. And here to talk about that is the man who was behind that lawsuit, Christopher Ferrara, special counsel at Thomas More Society. Chris, bring us up to date on what's going on here.
Well, co-counsel Michael McHale and I worked together on this, and we filed pleadings with the court in the Northern District of New York and received a temporary restraining order, temporarily enjoining and restraining enforcement of this vaccine mandate. The vaccine mandate, issued on August 26, 2021, basically states that healthcare workers in the covered entities, which is basically hospitals, hospices, and so forth, must be vaccinated with at least one dose of a COVID vaccine by September 27th, and there is no religious exemption. Curiously enough, the prior health order, which was in effect on August 18th, just before Cuomo left office, did provide for a religious exemption. 8 days later, this vaccine mandate strips it out. And the result is that New York seems to think it has the power to nullify federal law protecting sincere religious beliefs in the workplace and requiring reasonable accommodation of those beliefs under Title VII. Apparently, the Department of Health and the health bureaucracy, including Commissioner Zucker and the governor and the attorney general who will be enforcing this ultimately, have decided that they can just nullify Title VII, deny any sort of religious accommodation, and also the parallel protections under the New York State human rights law and the New York City human rights law, which are similar to those under Title VII, are also swept aside, which is astonishing because these people, doctors, nurses, a medical technologist, and a physician liaison, were all working in the healthcare industry throughout the pandemic. Some of them came down with COVID, recovered, and returned to work. They're hailed as heroes of the front line against COVID until this vaccine mandate passes, and now they're pariahs. And they're going to be terminated effective September 27th unless they obtain a vaccination with one of the 3 available COVID vaccines, all of which are abortion connected, either in testing, development, or production. Well, the district court in the Northern District had said that this cannot be allowed to happen. Prior to a hearing on the merits, he has temporarily enjoined and restrained the enforcement of this mandate. And then there will be a further hearing on the preliminary injunction, which would operate during the lawsuit, and ultimately a final injunction, which would be permanent. The court has scheduled a hearing on the preliminary injunction for September 28th.
Okay, Chris, I was going to ask you about the timeline. First of all, congratulations for this yeoman's work that you and your co-counsel have done at Thomas More Society. But what are the implications of this law? This only applies to those in the Northern District of New York, correct?
Well, no, because we have plaintiffs in all the districts. The Northern District was chosen because many of the plaintiffs reside there, and a lot of what happened to bring about the lawsuit happened in the Northern District. Also, the governor does business in the Northern District, and so does the attorney general, whereas Commissioner Zucker has an office in Manhattan. So all of the districts are involved, but this district is a reasonable venue because much of the events giving rise to the suit happened in Northern District locations. The implications are that a state overreaches when it attempts to impose a vaccine mandate with no religious exemption. Even California, the citadel of the oppressive lockdown, the most restrictive lockdowns in the country next to Cuomo's, or actually probably similar to Cuomo's, has a vaccine mandate with a religious exemption. There's no excuse for depriving religious objectives in the state of New York to an exemption from COVID vaccination based on sincere religious beliefs, that these vaccines are connected to abortion and they cannot have anything to do with them. And it doesn't matter what the Pope thinks or certain other bishops think, because under discrimination law, what counts is the individual's personal religious belief, which in this case happens to be supported by a number of Catholic bishops, such as Bishop Athanasius Schneider and Bishop Strickland in Texas and others. So there might be some disagreement in the hierarchy about this, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what the individual objector believes. And the 17 people who are plaintiffs in this suit all believe the same thing, that they can't have anything to do with these vaccines.
Yeah. And Chris, I wanted to ask you about that because I know a lot of people watching this right now are thinking, what do I do? Because millions of people are faced with this situation of losing their jobs and with the heavy hand of the state looming over them. And they want to know, okay, how do I claim a religious exemption? I mean, is it necessary to claim your individual religious exemption from a priest or a bishop? Or can I just say that I claim a religious exemption because this is my sincere religious belief?
The EEOC guidance is clear that you don't need the support of a particular denomination. You don't have to have a statement from a priest. You don't need documentation of a religious belief. It's nice to have those things. It buttresses your claim, but it's not legally necessary. And the EEOC even makes it clear that someone's moral conviction, held with the firmness of a religious conviction, also qualifies for workplace accommodation as a religious belief. You don't need to belong to any denomination. Further, the EEOC guidance and Supreme Court precedent indicate that your belief can actually be contrary to that of other members of your denomination, because courts don't get involved in telling claimants that they have to follow the Pope or follow this or that bishop. All the court wants to know is, do you have a sincere religious belief? Is the belief sincere? Is it religious? Documentation's nice if you have a bishop that supports you, as we do in this case, or some other source that supports the plaintiffs, as we do. But the controlling factor is what the individual sincerely believes and holds with religious conviction. It's very big, and I think anyone who's worried about getting a religious exemption can go and obtain a copy of this injunction, which is a public record, on the website of the court, and have a discussion with the employer about what the employer intends to do. Because the employer has no obligation, as we see it, to deny religious exemptions. And if a religious exemption was already granted, and some people already have these exemptions, including some of the plaintiffs in this case, well, then that should be operating now. And there should be no need to ask for it again. So I would take news of this to your employer, whoever that may be, and engage in the so-called interactive process that the EEOC regulations require, and work out a reasonable accommodation with your employer. Now, you might not like the reasonable accommodation, but if you don't have to get vaccinated, that's a different issue, how reasonable the accommodation is. We're not involved in that aspect of it at this point.
Yeah.
I know you're not getting much sleep right now, and you're working with 17 plaintiffs. So just thank you again for taking the time to meet with us today. If you could just comment, there was a great line you had in the press release that was sent out last night. You said, never in the history of mankind have we seen something like this. Could you just talk about that a little bit more?
We've seen one thing after another in these COVID regimes that has no precedent in American history or even world history. Never before in the history of pandemics have entire populations of a nation been locked down, subjected to restrictions because a few people are getting sick or dying. Now, we're not minimizing death, obviously. But as Denmark has just observed, the COVID infection is no longer, as they call it, a socially significant disease to the extent that you have to impose all these draconian measures. And furthermore, no matter how serious it is, even if it's the bubonic plague, you have to treat religion the same way as you do secular activities that are comparable. So if you're exempting any secular activities, if you're giving medical exemptions, for example, the state needs a compelling reason to justify why religious exemptions are not granted. Otherwise, you have a problem of disparate treatment. What's unprecedented here is a government edict that an entire class of citizens must be inoculated against its will or face termination from employment, damage to professional standing, and basically the ruination of their careers. We've never seen anything like this in the history of the state of New York, the United States, or Western history, or the history of any nation, as far as I know. It's absolutely absurd. It cannot be allowed to stand.
Chris, what keeps you going? I know you're a high energy guy, but what is it that keeps you? I mean, we reported last summer, you were the one who helped keep churches open all over this country last year. What is it that keeps the fire burning inside you?
The search for justice. And I'm not being melodramatic. These things are manifest injustices that ought never to be tolerated in any decent society, especially not in a constitutionally ordered society in which the First Amendment guarantees the right to religious freedom. So basically, it's a kind of anger that drives me. I cannot tolerate the spectacle of these grotesque power grabs, the ridiculous overreaching by governments that seem to think they can get away with anything as long as some judge doesn't stop them. And in this case, thank goodness, we have a temporary restraining order, and now we're waiting for a hearing on a preliminary injunction that we hope we also obtain. Mm-hmm. The judiciary is going to be the last line of defense against these outrageous deprivations of liberty in the name of containing the spread of a virus, which, in case you haven't noticed, never seems to be contained, does it? There's always another excuse for another lockdown or another measure that's oppressive. Now we're told, incredibly enough, by both the president and vice president, that the vaccinated must be protected against the unvaccinated. And if you don't see how ridiculous that is, then I can't help you.
Yes, and now we're talking about the 4th booster shot, and then it'll be the 5th booster shot.
Yeah, Israel. The 4 booster shots in Israel are being suggested now.
Right.
And 3 in the United States.
Yeah.
And where does it end? I'll tell you where it ends. It ends where the Constitution is enforced by judicial intervention. That's a way out of this nightmare.
And are we talking about the Supreme Court, you think, is where this is going to be headed?
I'm not sure. This may end up in the Second Circuit. From there, it may go to the Supreme Court. I don't like to predict where things are going in this case or any other case. But let's hope it doesn't have to get that far.
All right, Chris. Well, major victory today. Thank you for all the work that you've done on this. And just in the last 18 months, Chris, you have been a savior, really, for so many of us that have been shut out of churches. We couldn't receive the sacraments as Catholics. And thank you so much, Chris. And I really appreciate.
Thank also my co-counsel, Michael McHale, whose superb brief writing contributed mightily to these good outcomes.
Well, I hope that everybody understands what the Thomas More Society means, because you guys are on the front lines, Chris. And just, for all of you, God bless you, sir, and thank you.
You're welcome. God bless you too.